No armies to fight, no locals to threaten, just lots of land, free for the taking. This was Iceland, virgin land, and the only Viking settlement in the far west that was to last through the ages. Much of what we know of the Vikings comes from the Icelandic sagas. Histories written by Icelandic monks between the 12th and 14th centuries.
Hann byggði suður í Reykjavík. Þar Ingólfshöfði kallaður. Ísland byggðist fyrst úr Noregi á dögum Haralds Hárfagra.
Iceland was first settled from Norway. A Norwegian named Ingolf was the first to leave there for Iceland. He settled south in Reykjavik. At the time, Iceland was covered with forest between mountain and seashore.
The sagas were written in Iceland, and they are telling the stories about the settlement of Iceland and advancing the myth, really, of how Iceland became settled by independent Norwegians and people from the British Isles.
Scholars approach the sagas with a heavy dose of skepticism.
The authors, they inherited their story material, you could say, and so there are sometimes more than 200 years that's between the writing and the actual time of events. So the accuracy obviously has gone through many generations, so we can think that it's not historically accurate like we would think a chronicle would be, but we know what's happening and when, and the storytelling is at its finest in some of these sagas, and they're a fine blend of fantasy and fact.
Beyond the epic fantasies of the sagas were the real people who lived and died in Iceland. The hard facts of Viking life on this isolated island are now coming to light through the work of archaeologists like Tom McGovern.
We have bone collections from Iceland, fortunately, span virtually the entire period of settlement. It has the advantage that the sagas don't have, that it's consistent. It's the same kind of data throughout. It doesn't require someone to have been there and write things down, and it doesn't depend on someone's judgment. That kind of evidence is giving us a very different understanding of what the Viking colonization was all about.
Near one Viking farmstead, McGovern's team was called in to sift through the soil of a giant medieval garbage dump.
This strange depression at the south of the site was full of animal bones, full of fire-cracked rock, full of burnt twigs and large chunks of wood. And they called us in, as one of our specialties has been working on these messy but really interesting garbage dumps, or middens as they're called, across the North Atlantic. Some of these things can be 3 meters or more deep and often stretch over the whole period of occupation of the farm. And in excavating these things, you're going back through layer after layer of things people threw out.
Today, Iceland is virtually barren. Most wood must be imported. But the sagas claim that when the Vikings arrived, the island was covered in forests. McGovern's dig proves that in this case, the sagas were right.
We were getting just this summer large chunks of wood charcoal, which are clearly just a cross-section of big old birch trees, the sort of thing that just does not live in this region today. You have that sort of thing being present in large quantities, and this is just the charcoal they couldn't be bothered to burn. These were clearly people who had plenty of wood to burn, at least in these first few generations of settlement.
Ultimately, the Viking settlement would have a devastating impact on the landscape.
We have all tended to think that it's only industrial revolution that sees a major human impact on the environment, either from deforestation or erosion or pollution. But now, not just in the North Atlantic, but throughout the world, we're realizing that many of these impacts go far back into prehistory.
Here on Iceland, the culprits weren't just the Vikings themselves. but the destructive animals they brought to the island.
One of the things that came out of the excavations, at least from our bones end of things so far, is a very clear indication that the package of animals that the Vikings went out into the North Atlantic with, ultimately driving from Norway and from continental Scandinavia, was the full range, including horses, pigs, as well as sheep, goats, and cows. The pigs go in and uproot the small trees. The horses have their grazing pattern, the cattle have theirs, the sheep have theirs, the goats have theirs. Together, this package of animals is almost like a bulldozer moving across this subarctic landscape. So we're seeing this image of these folks coming into this landscape and really changing it.
Soon there were 30,000 Viking colonists on Iceland. All the best land was claimed. Little was left for the new settlers who continued to stream across the sea from Norway. One of these was Eric the Red. Arriving in Iceland around 970, the Viking chieftain clashed with his new neighbors. Bloodshed followed, and Eric was soon banished. Rather than return to Scandinavia, Eric set his sails toward the west and the uncharted waters of the North Atlantic. According to the sagas, Eric was looking for an unspoiled land, once spotted by storm-tossed sailors years before.
Eiríkur sagði að hann ætlaði að leita lands þess Gunnbjörn.
Eric told them he was going to search for the land that sailor Gunnbjorn had sighted, and he promised he would return to visit his friends if he found this country.
Remarkably, Eric did return. The land that Gunnbjorn had seen, and that Eric found again, was Greenland. Greenland lies about 450 miles west of Iceland, a journey of at least 4 days. After sighting land, Eric explored the southern and western coasts, eventually finding a spot reminiscent of his native Norway. How did Eric find his way in these uncharted and stormy seas? Were there any secrets to Viking navigation? This replica of a Norwegian Viking ship retraced Eric's journey.
It took us 13 days to sail from Iceland to Greenland. And that year there was so much ice we had to make a huge bend around the dangerous Cape Farewell. That's why it took so long. And it was there, between Iceland and Greenland, that I had a chance to test the sun compass that I have here.
According to one theory, a small wooden wheel found in Greenland may have been used by Viking sailors as a sun compass. A curved line was carved across the circle, indicating the sun's travel through the sky on a clear day. The line corresponded to the shadow cast from a small stick positioned in the middle, a short shadow at noon and a long shadow at dusk. To work as a compass, the wheel must be turned until the sun's shadow touches the line. Many scholars doubt that the tiny wheel served as a compass, but sailor Max Vinner is a believer.
In one way, this compass is better than a magnetic compass, because at the southern coast of Greenland, you have up to 40 degrees of deviation with a magnetic compass. But this is not a problem with the sun compass. A sun compass is correct and never lies.
Whether Eric relied on a compass or sailor's intuition, he not only succeeded in reaching Greenland, but he returned safely to Iceland. According to the sagas, he headed back to Greenland, this time with a fleet of 25 ships, filled with colonists. Unfortunately, only 14 boats completed the difficult journey. Some turned back to Iceland, but the rest disappeared at sea. The Viking ship was strong.